Well, hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Now, of course, we didn't go live at 5 on Thursday today, even though I normally go live at 5 on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday on this channel. On Fridays, we go over to my second channel, Actively Unwoke, for happy hour. We'll talk more about that in a sec. But the reason we didn't go live at 5 today is because it's a spy stream kind of night. It is a spy stream night, and we are continuing on from the series that we started last week. Let me just get it up on the screen so we can remind ourselves. Oh no. Oh no. Did Google not? Oh, F. I might have to come out and restart again or something. God damn it. Damn it. Damn it, damn it, damn it, damn it, damn it. Oh my God. I hate Max sometimes. Google has taken away my ability to share my screen. So hang on. We're going to fix this now. Okay. Okay. Everyone sit tight. I'm going to be right back. Okay? I'm going to be right back. Sit tight. Don't go anywhere. Okay, I think I'm back. Am I back? Am I back? Can you guys hear me? You can see my screen. That's actually the most important thing for the moment. See, you gotta love spy stream nights. Spy stream nights are always rife with technical failures of every possible imaginable thing, and now I have to reset. What I had to do is restart. What happened is, for some reason, Chrome decided not to let me share my screen anymore. I don't really understand why. And so I just had to shut down the entire browser and restart it. And we look like we're back in business. I just got to get some stuff up on my screen real quick, guys. Thank you for bearing with me. This is good that I started early. I actually started about 15 minutes earlier than I usually do because I don't know. I just maybe had a premonition that something was going to go wrong tonight and that I would need to fix something. And we were there. I want to thank Tandy Lynn in the meantime for that super sticker. I appreciate it. All right, I'm just getting my screen set up. I just got one more thing to do, and then we can jump into our regularly scheduled program. It's because YouTube is punishing me. YouTube is punishing me for doing this. I know. I bet that's what it is. Now, I should also be live on Odyssey. Yep, that's up and running. I should be live on Rockfin. I should be live on Rumble. I should be coughing out a lung over on Getter. Everything looks to be up and running and working just perfectly. And tonight, we are here for a spy stream. Now, we started spy stream last week. This is a 3-part spy stream. And I was actually a little afraid that we weren't going to get invited back to the second part. I wasn't sure because someone last week came into spy stream and they told, Tandy Lynn with the other super sticker, Tandy. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it, guys. All your super chats and all your super stickers go to support the channel. And really, I cannot do it without your support. And I'm really grateful. So we started this last week and we did our first spy stream of this series, Elementary Teaching for Equity and Justice. Sharpen your radar for missed teachable moments and attempts at equity and inclusion that can further marginalized students. Now, with Spy Stream, if you've never been before, what we do is we watch a woke training live on the internet. I have infiltrated this training. And by infiltrated means I paid for this training. I paid for this for all of you. You're all welcome. And the reason we do this is we want to see what the enemy is teaching. We want to watch it from start to finish. This is very similar to what we do in happy hours on Fridays on Actively Unwoke. But the thing of it that's different is normally happy hours on Actively Unwoke are not live trainings. Sometimes they might be trainings that are years and years and years old. They're just stuff I find on YouTube or the internet. And it's just, it's a look back. We're seeing a live training tonight. We are logging into their Zoom. They don't know we're broadcasting this on the internet. And the reason I was a little bit nervous is someone came into the chat last week and they were like, "I'm going to tell them that you are broadcasting it on the internet." And apparently that didn't happen because I still got the link. Because of course I sign up for these things under fake names and do my very best to try to play it covert. We don't disrupt their training or anything. We don't do anything nefarious. We let them do their thing. We might ask them questions, but I don't disrupt their training in any way. I just show you guys what they're teaching when they think that no one is listening to them and no one is watching them. Naruto says, great start to the stream. RPG games are going woke with a consent spreadsheet. I did see that earlier, Naruto. All right, guys, we're going to be getting started. The training is set to start in about 15 minutes. I do have my Zoom link up somewhere, so we're not going to log in just yet. We're gonna play it cool. We're gonna give it about 10 minutes before we log in, but I wanted to cover some other stuff before we get started for tonight. Now, of course, you know that the very best way to support my work is by becoming a member in my locals community. You can become a member at kb.locals.com/support, which is pretty great. And what you're going to get when you become a member of my locals is you're going to get access to 2 exclusive Zoom calls with me every single week. We do them on Mondays and Wednesdays. They are 3 to 4 hours long, and we do not record them. And I literally do spend 6 to 8 hours every single week on private Zoom calls with my locals because my locals community is the best. We talk about a lot of stuff. We plan fun things. We strategize. We gossip. I spill all the tea in locals that I don't talk about publicly. And my locals members are trustworthy. And so they don't share that stuff outside of the group. We have a Bitchcraft coming up on Saturday. Bitchcraft is when we craft on a live Zoom call. It is literally just a Zoom call with crafting. I, of course, will be knitting as the far most superior craft. But you can knit, you can crochet, you can color, you can draw, you can paint, you can fold your laundry, you can clean your gun. I really don't care what you do, but if you want to come hang out with us on Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we will be doing Bitchcraft in locals. We've got a book club coming up. And of course, lately, my locals have been making a splash because I have a little subset of my locals community called the Unwoke Army. And every one of my supporters is eligible to join the Unwoke Army at this point. The reason that I keep this to supporters only in my locals is frankly because I want to get to know you on the Zoom calls before I allow you into the inner sanctum, because the Unwoke Army is quite literally the inner sanctum. We have a private Discord server, and in case you guys have been sleeping under a rock for the past couple days, we broke some big effing news this week. All this stuff about middle school grooming schools in Burlington, Vermont, that was us. That was us. We watched this training for happy hour last week on Actively Unwoke. We watched the training and we were so disturbed by what we saw, we spent all weekend doing research into the Burlington school system. And that is what culminated in that thread that made its way around Twitter. That's what culminated in the entire article that we put together. We're still researching it. We're not stopping. But check this out. Less than 1 week ago, we were watching a happy hour on youtube.com/actively unwoke. We'll be doing it tomorrow at 5 o'clock too. You can come and join us. We worked all weekend to write this article. Yesterday, 2 days ago, the thread on Twitter hit over 1 million views. And yesterday, our work was covered by PragerU, by Ben Shapiro, and last night, Laura Ingraham covered it on the Ingraham Angle, or whatever her show's name is. Now, of course, they didn't credit us at all. They just stole our journalism and pretended that no work went into it, because that is, and this is the reason I started the Unwoke Army. The height of journalism right now is stealing content that other people find on the internet and talking about it as if you found it. That is the height of journalism on both the left and the right. Really pisses me off. One of the reasons I started the Unwoke Army was because I think that real journalism needs to be done. And the only reason that this story about the Burlington School District got airtime is because 24 people, average people, like all of you, worked all weekend long to investigate this school district, everything they had put online, everything they had, everything that Ben Shapiro covered yesterday was publicly available. Everything that Laura Ingraham covered on her show last night was publicly available, and no journalist had bothered to look into it. We did. We did this work. and we're going to keep going. I've been talking to whistleblowers today. I've been talking to media in Vermont today. The Burlington schools have much more going on than what we covered in that. And quite frankly, I'm expanding out of Burlington. I talked to a whistleblower from one town over today in Vermont. And the Unwoke Army has been doing so much amazing research. We've actually found the company that supports all this crap in the Burlington schools. They're all over the place. They're all over the country, and we're going to be looking into it. So, if you want to get in on all that action and much, much more, you want to become a supporter in my locals. If you want to learn more about how you join the Unwoke Army, I literally put up a video on the channel today called How to Join the Unwoke Army. It provides all the information. You can go and watch it. But for right now, what you need to know is that you can become a member in my locals community by going to kb.locals.com/support and joining for $5 a month. You can join for $50 a year. You can also make a one-time gift. If you really can't swing that $5 a month, just use the promo code oh, that's not for annual. It's a monthly thing. Just go to the monthly one and do unwoke as a promo code, and you're going to get a free month. That is what you need to do to become a member of the Unwoke Army and to get in on the action. The other thing I want to tell you guys about, actually, literally 10 minutes before this stream started, check this out. I'm going to make myself big. Oh, I got my book. I got my book. First copy. First copy. Now, this is Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against woke insanity in your life. Doesn't it look beautiful? It's glorious. And you know what I love about this? I even love it without the dust cover because they gave me a beautiful white hardcover book with red lettering. It's so, so beautiful. This is actually Joshua's copy. I dedicated the book to Victor, but Joshua is getting the first signed copy of Actively Unwoke. I'm giving it to him on Monday. We're having lunch. And so that I just got the hardcover today. I'm so excited with how it turned out. But you can get yours by going to Amazon. Amazon currently, because my hosting company is fucking around with my website, and so activelyunwoke.com is not working right now. It damn well better be working tomorrow, or I'm going to be raising holy hell like that hosting company has never seen. But it should be back up. It was just a hacking thing. It's not really that big of a deal. I'm not getting canceled or anything. It was just something got hacked that shouldn't have gotten hacked. Anyway, you can currently order Actively Unwoke by heading over to Amazon, and you can order the hardcover, the audiobook, and the Kindle. It is pinned to the top of the chat. It is also in the description if you are watching on other channels. If you do not want to order from Amazon, you can order from Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Simon & Schuster, your local booksellers probably. It is coming out on May 10th. And I'm going to be doing a book club about it. I'm going to be there will be autographed copies available. They're just not available yet through premiercollectibles.com. That is going to be coming. And there's going to be lots of other stuff too. But guys, the more pre-orders, the more you guys pre-order the book, the better indicator it is to bookstores. And I want this book to fly. I want this book to get into hands everywhere because it is this book in which I outline my philosophy for fighting back against the woke, the philosophy that we implemented in the Unwoke Army when we got the Burlington schools all over the news for pulling shenanigans and grooming children in schools. This book is my philosophy and we put it into action. This is a proof of concept that what I write about in this book actually can work and can get attention and can fight back in a real way. So if you're looking to get involved, this is definitely the guidebook, and I hope you guys like it. I think you will. It breaks down the woke ideology in plain English. Let me get a proper promo. There we go. It breaks down the woke ideology in plain English. It gives you case studies of people who have fought back in the real world. It gives you actionable strategies that you can implement in your life, no matter where you live, what you do, whether you want to remain anonymous or not. It tells you what to do if you get canceled. It tells you what to do to manage your stress when you're fighting back against the woke, because it is always a stressful thing. So it's got lots and lots and lots of goodies. All right, let's see. Let's just look. We've got a few more minutes. Okay, here is what we're going to be learning today on Spy Stream. Let's see. I saw a question in the chat. From which store should I purchase to create the most woke tiers? Probably Amazon. probably Amazon, just because like it just like the rankings really help books to get purchased. And listen, guys, can you imagine? Can we just anticipate what would happen if the New York Times was required to put this on their bestsellers list? Can you imagine the amount of tears? Now the New York Times bestsellers list is a political thing. It's not actually based on sales, like, at all. It's a thoroughly political thing. Dave Rubin talks about this all the time, and Dave Rubin is 100% correct. But if you guys buy enough copies, then they're gonna have to put it on the damn list. I don't know. I'm ambivalent about whether or not I want that to happen. I do think it would actually be really cool though. I just want to get it into as many hands as possible so that we can actually start doing stuff instead of just complaining about stuff like all the time. Anyway, here is what we're going to be watching starting in 7 minutes. Passive voice, pedestals, and play acting. Teaching about the civil rights movement may seem like a surefire way to engage children in learning about equity and justice. Yet, all sorts of related teaching materials, picture books, and activities can easily reinforce white supremacy if we're not paying attention. This session shares powerful examples of how this happens with ideas and resources for how to build elementary social studies and language arts curriculums rooted in equity and justice. I'm just going to take a screenshot of that real quick. I'm going to tweet that out. That's what we're going to be watching tonight. Emphasize says, my daughter is getting hit in the face now. The slap. Well, I hope that's not true, Emphasize. That's an awful thing to say. Come on, man. Don't make me put that on the screen, Emphasize. You're trying to get me demonetized? What's going on? All right, guys. Well, we've got a few more minutes left before I'm going to log in. Hi to Qbert over on Rumble. I see you. Good to see you there. Hi to Marjorie on Getter. Good to see you there, Marjorie. Ooh, Disbee says, just order my copy, hoping to get the author to sign. I will be at Porkfest. Yeah. Obviously. I will do a whole book signing at Porkfest. And then we can hang out and drink and pull shenanigans in the middle of the woods, and it'll be fun. Man. All right. Let me see. Let me pull that off the screen. I'm going to just log into the Zoom. Now we got to be quiet. Okay. Shh. Well, first I have to find my email. Where the hell did the email go? Where did it go? Where did it go? Okay. Guys, play it cool. We're going to log into the Zoom and see if it's up and running. Play it cool. Play it cool. Hang on. It's asking me to put something in. I have to actually remember the email address that I signed up for this with. That does occasionally, on occasion, help, doesn't it? If you remember the email address. I have so many. Like, my haters hate that I have sock accounts, but, like, the reason I actually have sock accounts is because I sign up to stalk woke trainings with them. That's the real reason. My haters think it's because I'm always stalking them on Twitter. That's not the real reason. Okay. It's not started yet. It's waiting for the host to start, but I've got it up. Yeah. So my haters all think that the real reason I have like sock accounts is to stalk them all on Twitter all day, every day. I really don't give an F what my haters say on Twitter most of the time. I use them to sign up for woke things because I don't want to be found out. Like if they see my name on a list, I'm gonna get kicked out. Probably if they're paying attention. I've been able to fly kind of like under the radar thus far, and I kind of want to keep it that way, to be honest. Like they all know Chris Rufo's name. Chris Rufo ain't getting into any of this stuff. They know James Lindsay's name. Most of them don't know my name yet. And I kind of want to keep it that way. I would strongly prefer to be like the person kind of like in the background that's just giving light to all of this stuff, and then people can do with it what they will. But we gotta be stealthy. I need to get a beret. I need to get a beret to wear for Spy Stream. I need a whole costume or something. Um, we're going to be doing this. In theory, we will have our third Spy Stream next week for this particular series. And guys, just so you know, if you ever find a training, like a woke webinar, something that is like publicly available, even if it requires money to sign up for, because I can crowdfund the money, just let me know. Email me, get in touch, DM me on Twitter. You can email activelyunwoke@gmail.com. You can go to drcarlin.com/contact and email me there. You can't go to my main website right now because my host is effing with it. But that should be back up by tomorrow. But you can get in touch with me. Ooh. We're live. Hang on. We're live. Hang on.
Hello, everyone.
Hang on. Share. Window. Right. Zoom. Let me know if you can hear it. Let me know if you can hear it. She's not saying anything.
Welcome.
She just did. Can you guys hear her? How's the audio? I can never tell.
Hi, Noreen.
As a reminder, I usually keep quiet during Spy Stream, and what I do is I chat in.
Everything working okay? Can you hear
and
me?
then I display.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Is our audio's
Hi,
balanced?
good evening. Hi.
Okay.
My face is just like so puffy and I'm so out of sorts. I just tried to do like your face recognize to open up your phone, and it was like, I don't recognize you. I was like, also my hair is down. I never wear my hair down. I think my phone is just confused generally with my state of affairs.
Okay, I'm just gonna remove that from the stream real quick, and I just want to say, oh, can you guys probably still hear them, right?
This is the only time it's ever down is after I get it cut. Otherwise, always. I think you've probably seen my hair down like 3 times in all the years that we've been friends.
No, they're doing this in public.
Hey, everybody! Oh, look at her! Look at this. We already got 50 people in the room.
All right. I know, it's great. Do you want to do the screen share tonight? Just because you're doing more slides than I am, so then you should probably have the control.
I should, but just heads up, my computer is like overzealous with the clicking, and it sometimes
real quick say before we actually get started,
or like goes ahead when I don't want to. But
I don't do
we'll see if I can get it
over the stream. What I do is I chat in and I display my chats on the screen, and that way they can still say whatever they want to say, but we can kind of like still provide comment on it. If you super chat in during the stream, I will 100% display your comment on the screen. I just won't read it out loud, but I will display it so that everyone else can read it. And I, of course, appreciate all the super chats that come in. They help support the channel. And then I will be displaying my chats on the screen. But even if you don't super chat in and you just say something really clever and really smart, I might display that too. It just depends. But that's how it works during Spy Stream. All right, I'm going to bring it back now. Oh.
No judgments. My
full screen.
Or computer. It's like a year old and it's
acts
like it's 90 because I'm pretty hard on them.
We've got the chat up too.
Okay, can you
I always like to display the chat just to see what they say.
How is it already April 7th, by the way?
Time is flying by.
It was snowing here today, by the way.
Of course it was. Let's see.
We got another minute or two for people to pop in tonight.
I'm really excited. We didn't
got this clock that I used to time presentations, and it's probably from the mid 90s, and I've never changed the battery. And I feel like it might be like a magical watch from the future, like some sort of timepiece that I don't even know what. So it's my.
I wonder if there's like a magical phrase that you just have to figure out, and that will trigger the time travel.
Maybe. Hello again, everyone.
Hello from DC to
California. Oh, DC, my beloved second home. I was supposed to be spending a month there this summer, and I don't think that's going to happen now, but I love it there so much. So glad to have DC representation. Hello.
I see another familiar person.
Oh, Carolyn twisted the knife with the 90 degrees there. It's like 40.
It's 47 here. It's very windy.
It's so windy the last couple of days, like below street signs over windy. Oh, Liz, thank you so much. That's great. Yeah, with the Pollyanna curriculum. Noreen and I were talking about it a little bit afterwards, and from what I've seen of the teachers I've worked with who are using it, I think how they are using it is really thoughtful and lovely, but just like any tool, people can use it in harmful ways if they aren't properly trained, educated, etc. So it's hard for us to say that we recommend a curriculum or don't recommend it, because it all depends on how it's used and what it's used for and all of that. So I'm really happy to hear that you are having a good experience with it. And the teachers I worked with who've used it really, really appreciated it too. So I know it's under attack in a lot of places, or it's like on a watch list, you know, but I don't really know that much about it. I just know that teachers I've worked with in different places have liked it.
Wait, what is she talking about?
Hello.
I missed
We
it.
got folks from Baltimore, Ames, Brooklyn, Michigan, Indianapolis, San Jose. We were just talking about the Pollyanna, what's it called? Racial literacy curriculum.
Racial literacy, yeah. It's
Pollyanna
kind of just like,
racial
at least
literacy
the
curriculum.
snippets I've seen from it is really just like an introduction to really
I don't know
basic
what that is.
concepts and to help kids develop a really healthy racialized identity, whatever that might be. It's whether kids identify as kids of color or multiracial or white or whatever it is, it's intended for all kids to develop a healthy racial identity.
Pollyanna racial literacy. Is that what this is?
Great. Hi,
we can look up that later.
Oh, it's great to see people. 98 seems like toasty for early April, but maybe
Pollyanna racial literacy.
Hey everyone, we got Illinois, Nebraska, Ontario.
Yay. That's great. We can probably go ahead and get started, I think.
Yes, let's get started. Yes.
6:03.
Alrighty.
Oh, and yes, someone had just asked again that they're not seeing a video audio mute button. And because this is a webinar format, all of the participants don't have access to video and audio. It's just people who've been promoted to panelist. And so in this case, it's just Noreen and I that are able to use our video and use our audio, but we'll talk a little bit more about how we want to use the chat and use the Q&A, especially for those of you who weren't with us last time. We will recap all of that. Noreen, you want to get us started?
Sure. So as those of y'all that joined us last time know, this is the second out of 3 sessions in our series. And today's session is called Beyond Passive Voice Pedestals and Play Acting. You want to do reminders?
Sure. Yeah, just as a reminder, we are thrilled that people are connecting in the chat box and sharing resources with each other. We think that's a feature of Zoom webinars that is really cool and exciting, to connect people from all over the world literally with each other. We have an asterisk there because we are aware that someone is live streaming us illegally without our permission for the purposes, I think, of like political opposition to the kind of education that we're advocating for.
Hi.
And so we just want to alert everyone. We mentioned this in the email that went out after the first session, but just so you can make decisions about how you want to show up in the chat. We just want to make sure that everybody knows that there are people who might be here in bad faith that are participating in the session.
We're here in amazing
regardless
faith.
of why you're here.
Say
we're here to answer questions. We're here to help. We got a lot
to a
feedback
much
from
larger
folks
audience than you have
that we really
yourself.
appreciated about how much they enjoyed the session, how much they're learning from these.
They could have figured out who I was from the first session too, just so you guys know. They really could have figured it out.
But we just want to make sure everybody has a heads up and can make an informed decision about how to participate tonight and next week.
Yeah, and that can mean maybe you want to change your name that's appearing in the chat, because like we said, we know that someone intends to live stream tonight despite our request for no recording. So that means that your information could potentially be made public as well.
It could be.
Just want to make sure that we're real clear that that is a violation of what we would requested, but we do want to protect the participants that are here. Sorry. We will try to have checkpoints for questions as we go. A lot of y'all asked questions last time that we were about to answer. So that may be the case again today. So if you've got something that you're really wondering about, like maybe just wait a little bit and then see if perhaps we can get to that.
I will act in better face than these
and
people.
If we don't, then pop it in the Q&A. And then we'll try our best to answer the Q&A at the end or in writing as we go, rather than throughout this time, just because there's a lot of stuff that we're going to cover.
And we did pay to be here.
So please utilize that Q&A box
they really
as much as you can. And then same thing as last time, we will have a recording available.
Maybe they'll figure that out for the next
one. 1 week, and we will give you all that tomorrow. And yet again, we'll say it one more time. We've said it in writing, and we're just going to keep repeating it.
If
you want to take a screenshot,
should be private.
That's
you are
fine,
talking
but please
about
no other recording, and
children.
We
Nothing
do not want anyone to live
child
stream that. That's a violation of the agreement that we've made with
private.
you all.
I didn't make that agreement when I signed
Lisa
up and paid
in the chat,
money.
sorry, I'm saying your name, asking how your name shows in the chat feed. I believe if you go to your settings, you can change your name that way. And if someone would like to,
and you want to do that in
have a little bit more detail about how to do that in the chat, that would be great. That way we can keep moving on. So I know some of y'all are very familiar with Zoom. So if you want to, if anyone wants to be a good citizen and just kind of give some brief explanations, that would be awesome.
I also, I really just want to say, I don't want to talk about this too much because I'll get pretty emotional. So bear with me. I will get emotional for a minute. But we got, the day after last week's session, we got really devastating medical news about my family. Well, we don't have a lot of time on this planet. Sorry. And whoever is here tonight, whoever is listening, I am sending you love. And I hope that you and your families are healthy and that you can hold your loved ones very, very close. And what Noreen and I talked about this a little bit last week, but what guides me in my work, why I'm so committed to this, is because I want my time on this earth to be about connection and healing and love, and making sure especially that kids in schools have an experience where they feel valued and seen and challenged,
incredibly emotionally
and that they're beautiful, healthy spaces for them to grow and develop. That's what this is all about. So truly, truly, whatever brought you here tonight, especially for anyone whose family is dealing with cancer, I am just whooshing love at you. And I hope that everyone out there can feel that, whatever brought you here tonight. So
I'm truly sorry that her family is sick. I don't wish like sickness on anyone.
There's a lot of
but
people
to
that are
say
here
that to
in
say
good faith to learn, to grow,
promote this ideology is emotionally manipulative.
Our youngest
sorry.
learners are often harmed in school spaces, and we can and should do better for all of the children that educators work with every day. And so we had a lot of conversations about what to do next, but we know that most of y'all are here for your students, and so we want to honor that, and we're just going to keep on doing what we do. And yeah, so here we go.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
We'll let you say whatever you want to say. I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to shut up.
Being the next slide,
and let them talk.
What is here?
And I'm going to knit.
We had talked about encouraging you all to watch Abbott Elementary if you are able to, wherever you are in the world, and if you haven't already fallen in love with these characters and with this show, that we think is a really beautiful representation of what teachers are doing in schools or trying to do in schools. So we have a poll. And I actually really had fun writing the descriptions of these gifts for everybody. So I'm going to launch the poll tonight about which character you are relating to today. And I'll give everybody about a minute to answer, and then I'll share the poll results. Marie, can you answer the poll?
No, I don't think panelists can.
Do you have one that's calling to you tonight?
I think I'm Melissa. I'm number 4 today. Also maybe 6.
I'm like alternating between a 2 and a 5, like trying to find joy in every day and just like, you know, really embrace the beauty in every day, and also feel just like toilet water is hitting my face at all times. All right, just a few more seconds here. Thanks everybody who's answering. And thank you so much to everybody in the chat for your kind words. Really appreciate it. And my heart goes out to anybody who's dealing with similar stuff. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, I'm going to end the poll, and I think I know how to share the results. Can you see the results now?
Yeah.
It looks like we have some toilet water folks and Spirit of the Lord, and there's nothing wrong with having some room for improvement. That's great. Like a nice kind of distribution, I'd say.
We have a lot of kindred spirits here tonight.
That's great.
Alrighty. Okay, sorry, and I apologize in advance. My computer is very jumpy, and so sometimes it will go ahead on the slide before I'm ready. Okay. So tonight we are covering passive voice, pedestals, and play acting. If you are reading our book or have already read our book, the topics of heroification and dramatization and gamification are what we're really centering on today, with the specific examples of the civil rights movement and westward expansion. See, it's acting wild. Alrighty. Katie, this is you, right?
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit, the sample content that we're going to talk about today with regards to heroification is the civil rights movement. But as with last week, we gave examples of units like holidays or community helpers, but really these problematics of idealization, normalization, today heroification, they can show up all over the curriculum. We're just holding up these examples as really commonly taught elementary units that have some questions or problems that we think, if we are committed to equity and justice, that we need to be really thoughtful about and deliberate about. So here, this is just a smattering of some common crafts or prompts or children's books that we know are used. And I think the civil rights movement, one reason we picked this to highlight tonight is because we think often when people are committed to equity and justice, they think, well, how could I not teach about equity and justice if I'm teaching about the civil rights movement? That's what it's all about. So how could I possibly do anything, problematic with that? But actually, there's a lot of concerns that can pop up that we think are useful to have on our radars. All right, ready? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit, and then I'll pass it off to Noreen to do a deep dive into this heroification. But we just wanted to shout out the civil rights movement specifically when it gets taught, and there's lots of research that is behind all of this, that it often gets taught in ways that prop up myths or stereotypes about the civil rights movement. So the first was that there's just kind of this like mysterious force that isn't named, that there was this injustice or discrimination that was just kind of happening in the air, and that most people knew it was wrong, and it just needed to be fixed, right? And Noreen will get into this a little bit more, but that's instead of really specifically naming the agents of action that were maintaining and constructing systems of oppression very, very, very deliberately for generations. There's also this myth or stereotype that the civil rights movement is a Southern phenomenon. And apologies to those of you who are elsewhere in the world. This is a very US specific example, but hopefully there are analogs where you are that this will resonate with. And also that it's limited in scope in terms of the chronology, that it happened in the South, it happened in the 1950s and 60s, and then things get solved with maybe the Civil Rights Act of 1965, or maybe with Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, then everything's better, and anything after that is just individual people's fault, and there is no more systemic problems, and people can't point to racism as why something bad is happening to them anymore. We also have this idea that we have Rosa Parks and we have Martin Luther King. Those are the two most commonly cited figures in the elementary curriculum, a bus and a dream, and then that equals equal rights for all, and like magically everything is better, and that it's all about the content of your character, not racism, which comes from a decontextualized line of Dr. King's speech at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. That was actually like in context, a line that makes more sense, and absolutely not even the focus of his speech. So just thinking about the ways that the civil rights movement even now sometimes gets spun like you just have to work hard, you just have to love people, and then that's enough. We don't need to do anything else. Okay, boop, old school slideshow time. So this is one of my favorite problematics, is a weird thing to say, but something that I really appreciated learning about because I started to notice it a lot in my own practice. And once you start noticing it, it's almost like you need a little buzzer or something to remind you when you're using it. Like you start noticing how deeply embedded it is in the way we speak or the resources that we're using with kids. So this has to do with the passive voice. And Noreen will talk about this a little bit more. So this is just one example. But passive voice, for any grammar nerds out there, is when you phrase the subject of an action, you phrase something that removes the subject of the action. So you say, for example, here, we could describe the Children's March in Birmingham by saying Black children were attacked by dogs and fire hoses, or even just saying Black children were attacked. And that phrasing obscures the people that were attacking them, right? It hides them in the way that we're phrasing it. So it's very different to say white police chief Bull Connor ordered his men to unleash dogs and use fire hoses to attack the Black children demonstrators. That paints a very different picture in our minds. We could do this for especially in history, we could do this for so many other things, like people were kidnapped and enslaved is a classic one, right? Like as if there was just some like invisible hand like plucking them up, right? Versus saying who was doing the enslaving. So we just want to be really careful about passive voice. Boop. Knowing chime in at any time. I know you're going to talk more about these though. This idea too about the South and 1950s and 1960s, we just want to make it super, super clear that the civil rights movement is a much, much longer struggle. It starts way before the 1950s. It is still ongoing today. And that long struggle is what we would want to teach kids about when we're teaching about the civil rights movement. And there are also Northern examples. So all of these images here are images of civil rights movement activities in the North long before 1950. The first step is a story that's really powerful about the 1840s, a little girl in Boston who was the very first lawsuit against school segregation anywhere in the country, and she lost. The first successful court case was in my home state of Iowa, just a few years later. But it is a beautiful book and a really important story to show how early on people were trying to use the courts in order to defend their rights and to win more rights. The next is a pamphlet by Ida B. Wells. And one of the things that this incredible journalist was known for was documenting lynching. And I thought this was an especially important example because we just recently had a federal law passed that makes lynching a federal crime. And that's something that Ida B. Wells was fighting for over 100 years ago, and documenting all the lynching that was taking place in the late 1800s, early 1900s across the United States, not just in the South. And then this comic strip is a picture of Edna Griffin, who's a woman who's known as the Rosa Parks of Iowa, where I'm from. A lot of states have examples like this, but she was actually doing her organizing and activism, her sit-ins, her boycotts, lawsuits against racial discrimination in the 1940s. Rosa Parks actually called Edna Griffin and said, I should be called the Edna Griffin of Alabama, because this was decades before what was happening in the South. So just some examples, but I'm a total nerd for local history. So hopefully you can dig into some local stories that are near and dear to your communities and your kids and families that you work with that could help challenge these myths about how the civil rights movement is typically framed. This one too, Noreen, I don't know if you want to chime in, we'll talk more about it, but there's been research that shows that these are the two most common examples of figures that get discussed with elementary school children. Rosa the Tired and Martin the Brave and the Beloved. Do you want to boop again? There's been really incredible historical work and oral histories showing that these are tropes, these are stereotypes that mask the level of intention and the level of organizing and education and deliberateness that activists like Rosa Parks were engaged in. She trained at the Highlander Folk School. She was part of the NAACP in leadership roles for many, many years. She was an activist against sexual assault. This was a woman who was deeply, deeply rooted in organizing movements. And that actually, even the story of that particular day, the bus driver actually violated policy, and that's what ended up having her sitting in a section. So even the story of that particular day, that she was a seamstress and she was just tired and couldn't do it anymore, the community knew this was happening. She was chosen, actually. There was a younger woman, Claudette Colvin. There's some great kids' books about Claudette Colvin, but she was younger. She wasn't afraid to take somebody to task. And there were reasons the movement thought she might not be the best spokesperson, and that they purposely chose Rosa Parks in order to have white people be sympathetic to this woman. Martin the Brave and Beloved, you can boop for that one. Not a beloved figure, not a popular figure. Of course, he was assassinated, so that's a fact. But even with the general public, the vast majority of people, especially white people in the United States at that time, thought he was super radical and completely out of line and dangerous. The FBI was watching him. There was an entire program called COINTELPRO that was targeting a lot of these activists that we've mentioned so far. And spying on them, basically infiltrating these movements. So absolutely not a figure who was uncontroversial or even supported in his time. And we have similar figures today that are super contentious and are saying the same things that Martin Luther King said, 50, 60 years ago. Boop.
Alrighty. So I'm going to take over for a bit and talk about heroification, specifically around the civil rights movement and the leaders that we learn about it. So James Loewen is a famous historian. He wrote a book called Lies My Teacher Told Me. You may have heard of that. It's fantastic. If you've not heard of it, I highly recommend it. But he describes heroification as a presentation of individuals as pious, perfect creatures without conflicts, pain, credibility, or human interest. Heroification erases the complexity of historical figures, kind of presenting them as these perfect beings, and it fails to acknowledge other important individuals by just spotlighting a few people. So, a few pitfalls. The first one is that people will try to add more complexity to these typically taught historical figures, but they don't necessarily acknowledge other people or the broader movements. So you're still focusing on someone who's viewed as like this incredible person, rather than like thinking about how they might have wrestled with some things, the conflicts that they may have had, the other people that supported them, the larger movement. Another pitfall is a presentation of non-dominant people as saints or even whitewashing their legacies. So we're gonna look at some specific examples of both of these. Alrighty, so oftentimes, particularly now with like the increase of available children's literature and resources, people will try to add more to the story of Rosa Parks. So for example, they might talk about what Katie mentioned just a few minutes ago, her time spent at the Highlander Folk School. However, it's still not really thinking about other historically significant figures or the broader movement around the Montgomery bus boycott, right? We're still just focusing on Rosa Parks. In terms of Martin Luther King Jr., as Katie just mentioned, he's often presented in this way that really just portrays him as this beloved figure who made all the right decisions and people just followed him and did whatever he said. In addition to those two particular heroes, a third hero that is often taught in elementary schools is Ruby Bridges. There's several different books, a couple of which are written by Ruby herself, who's still living, by the way. But even though people may read those stories and they often share this one particular image of her being escorted by US Marshals to school, they don't necessarily describe, at least not in detail, why she needed this level of protection. So let's talk about ways that we can contextualize this a little bit better. We see that previous image of Ruby at school, but we rarely see what was happening on the other side of this view. So these women were known as the cheerleaders. And every day that Ruby went to school, they would stand in front of France Elementary with signs. I'll just give you a few seconds to just read what you see, look at their faces. This is what Ruby encountered every single day. Now, when Ruby enrolled at France Elementary in New Orleans, all the white parents pulled their children out of school. All of the teachers except for one refused to teach her. That teacher was named Barbara Henry, and she taught Ruby alone in a classroom for over a year. We saw those images of the cheerleaders, right? We know that's what Ruby encountered every single day when she walked into school, when she walked out. There was also a woman who held up a black baby doll in a coffin. Another woman regularly threatened to poison her. And because of that, Ruby was only allowed to eat food brought from home. And she had weekly counseling sessions with psychologist Robert Coles, who wrote that famous book, The Story of Ruby Bridges, that we had pictured several slides ago. So most of y'all probably have that in your libraries. That was actually written by her psychologist. And I had read that with my students and I never knew that. So just thinking about a lot of these details that add so much more to the story. Because ultimately, you can't teach about school segregation without having an explicit conversation about racism, because that was what was behind segregation. No one is saying that you have to teach very young learners about racism, but don't assume that they don't know about it already and that they can't engage in a substantial conversation about it, especially if you're working with students of color who may regularly experience it firsthand. And the other side of that coin is if young children of color are experiencing racism, someone is enacting that racism upon them. Mm-hmm. So Folks may be trying to protect children, but if you listen to accounts from people of color of the first time they were called the N-word or other racial slurs, it is often when they were 3, 4, 5, 6, at school, on the playground, at the park. These things happen to young children, and a lot of the vitriol comes from other young children. So those young children who are enacting racism are hearing it from someplace. So as adults, this can be uncomfortable. But for the children that you are working with, that's not necessarily uncomfortable or new to them. So that's just a thing to keep in mind. No one is saying, if you teach early childhood, if you're in a pre-K classroom, you have to talk about racism. No one's telling you to do that. You know your context, you know your students and the communities that you work with. That's a decision that you as an educator make. But if you're going to talk about school segregation with your students, you have to talk about the role of racism in its creation and in its maintenance.
Thinking too about those experiences of young children, we do a lot of focus groups with kids, and that is the most common thing that we hear, even with young groups of students, is about the kind of harassment that they're experiencing. And that's just one part of racism, right? We know that there are deep systems and structures that kids and families are embedded into, but that for kids of color, that they are targets of direct interpersonal bigotry and harassment that can sometimes come from other children. And often those other children are not fully aware of what they're saying. They have a sense that it's harmful, taboo, or hurtful, or, but they might not have that context behind them, which is another reason we have to equip children to understand where this comes from. And we talked about this a little bit last time, that there are some really horrible, traumatizing graphic details that young Ruby had to go through. Noreen mentioned like the Black baby in a coffin. If I were working with 7 and 8-year-olds, that's not an image I would show them, but I absolutely would talk about the fact that Ruby had to endure harassment every day, right? And that she was scared every day, right? And that there were adults who were trying to hurt her and trying to keep her from coming to school, right? The graphic details you don't need to get into, but I'm not going to lie to kids about that, right?
Kids understand bullying, right? Like they can understand that she, a child, was being bullied by adults. And your students may ask you questions about that you can't answer. And it's okay for you to say, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know what they were feeling in their hearts. I don't know what kind of words they were using. It's okay for you to say that. Just recognize that you can't teach this stuff without getting into some of that. And I'm noticing that there's a lot of stuff in the chat. If y'all have questions, put them in the Q&A. That way it's easier for us to keep track of.
Thanks.
I can't like chat box.
Go. I'm watching it too. Go ahead. I'll keep track.
Okay. And so, I mean, ultimately, if you know better, do better, but you have to know the content. So if all you know about a lot of these people is what's in the picture book that you've always used, that's not enough. I just gave a talk with some students that are getting their master's in teaching in DC. And one of the things I told them was, look, y'all, I was guilty of this myself, but we can't keep doing it. If you're going to teach something historical that you don't know, you can't just Google it the night before. You have to have a deeper understanding than that. And you don't always have to take that approach for everything that you teach. But if you're going to get into something that's related to civil rights, history, the dehumanization of a group of people, you should have more than like a quick glance at Wikipedia. So some of the stuff that I'm going over, these are things that many of us have done. Like these are pitfalls and like slip ups that many of us have done, myself included. But if we know better, let's do better. That's all I'm asking.
Something else I'll just say, while I'm thinking about it, when we talk about the way that the civil rights movement typically gets taught, that there are tensions and debates even within the movement itself or within communities who were experiencing racism firsthand about what to do, because it was dangerous to take this stand. And for some people, that risk was really scary and they weren't willing to do it to protect their families. And then there were some people who said, we have to do it. We have an obligation to do it, right? When we talk about making things more complex, it's not just about like, ooh, this figure had this scandal or they did this problematic thing, although sometimes that's part of it, making these figures more complex. It's also about not creating a monolithic community that all agreed with what to do. And that those are contemporary dilemmas and debates, right? That are familiar to a lot of kids whose families are struggling with those same questions and aren't sure what to do in the face of structural and systemic inequality.
And I think part of why that's so important is because research has shown that young people, when they learn about these heroes, are like, oh, I could never do anything like that. I'm not that awesome. I'm not that good. I'm not that brave.
Perfect.
Right? I'm not that perfect. But when you get into some of this complexity and you let young people understand that these incredible leaders that we talk about now wrestled with this stuff, they talked ideas through with their family, with their communities, they hesitated, they made mistakes. Like, that just makes it even more powerful for them to be like, okay, so Martin Luther King Jr. was incredible, but he didn't always do everything right the first time. He didn't always know what to do. He had like a crew of people, like I have people that I can go to when I need advice, right? Like, it isn't about destroying heroes. That's not the point. The point is making them more understandable and approachable and more realistic role models.
Yep.
Alrighty, so what are some things we can do to avoid these pitfalls and engage more powerful pedagogy, particular to the civil rights movement? So 3 approaches we're going to talk about. First is diversification, then we're going to get into humanization, and then lastly, mobilization. So oftentimes when we talk about the civil rights movement, we tend to focus on, like we said, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., adults. But there were also incredible examples of youth activism where young people, from school-age children to college students, took part in various parts of the movement, initiated parts of the movement, and showed tremendous bravery. And there's a lot of wonderful media that documents this, oftentimes from those participants' own words, looking back on it 20, 30, 40 years later. So there's a lot out there. So we've referenced the Birmingham Children's Crusade a little bit, and I'm going to use that as a specific example in just a few minutes. There's also the sit-ins in restaurants, lots of great children's literature about that, and then the stories of the Freedom Riders. So in addition to highlighting youth activism, you can also just think about other examples that tend to not get a lot of attention in school. So Katie mentioned Claudette Colvin, who refused to give up her bus seat to a white passenger 9 months before Rosa Parks did the same. And she was actually part of the lawsuit that ended segregated buses in Montgomery, along with, I think, 5 other people, the Gail v. Browder case. Another person who is absolutely incredible, but rarely gets taught in elementary grades, is Fannie Lou Hamer. She was a Mississippi voting and women's rights activist who was arrested and brutally beaten for sitting in a whites-only restaurant. She co-founded the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and supported farm cooperatives. So she just did a ton of stuff. Just a really incredible figure. And then a third example is Bayard Rustin, who is the person who introduced Mahatma Gandhi's ideas of nonviolence to Martin Luther King Jr. However, because Bayard Rustin was gay, and remember, in the 1950s and 60s, homosexuality was still very much viewed as like deviance, right? And so fears of associating Bayard with the movement often meant that he was doing things behind the scenes rather than being side by side with Martin Luther King Jr. in public events. So for the kind of diversification that I've just recommended, here is a small selection of fabulous literature. A lot of the stuff may look familiar to you. So like Freedom on the Menu and Sit-In are pretty well known. Very recently, the She Persisted biographical series just released a book about Claudette Colvin last year. That's fabulous, super detailed. There's also a graphic novel about her. And then there's a new book by J.P. Miller about Bayard Rustin that just came out recently as well. So combination of some oldies and but goodies, and then some newer pieces here. See, I'm telling y'all, my computer likes to just whiz through things. Okay. In terms of humanization, we talked about how heroification portrays people like these perfect, larger than life superheroes. Rather than doing that, we can emphasize some of their struggles and hesitations. So rather than just focusing on the speech that MLK gave at the March on Washington, and particularly just that one line, like we can go beyond that. We can go before, we can go after. And so these are 2 examples of children's literature that do just that. So A Place to Land is a recent picture book. I think it came out 2 or 3 years ago, and it goes through how Martin Luther King Jr. wrote that speech, how he was wrestling with what to include and what to leave out, the advice that he was getting from people like Ralph Abernathy. So this is a great way to kind of get a glimpse into that experience for him, rather than just talking about the speech once it was ready to go. And then Memphis Martin and the Mountaintop is about the sanitation strike of 1968. This is right around the time of his death. And so usually when kids learn about Martin Luther King Jr., folks tend to stop right after the March on Washington rather than seeing how his legacy continued, and also how he became quite frustrated with the lack of progress that was occurring. All right, I know somebody mentioned The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks in the chat. There's both an adult version and a young reader's adaptation. And these books are a great way to explore Rosa Parks's life before that fateful day on the Montgomery bus, and include things like her work with the NAACP, work as a sexual assault investigator, and her membership in the League of Women Voters. Now, when we say mobilization, we're thinking about going beyond just to focus on individuals and really understanding the movement, how people came together as a collective and took on actions and efforts for change. And so here we have a bunch of resources for you. So those top two books, Putting the Movement Back into Civil Rights Teaching and Understanding and Teaching the Civil Rights Movement, those are books for educators. So those are resources that will give you a wealth of ideas. Understanding and Teaching the Civil Rights Movement on the top right is more geared towards secondary, but there's lots of useful things in there that can help you. The bottom left book, A More Beautiful and Terrible History, is not an educator resource, but it is a fascinating glimpse into the civil rights movement, particularly how women were involved and often decentered. So if you just want to know a lot of that history, it's a really engaging read. I sometimes struggle because some historical texts are very kind of academic and dry. I loved this one. So I highly recommend it. Jean Theodore Harris does some lovely work. And then the next two here, we have Teaching for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter at School. These are collections of short pieces. Most of them are written by practitioners, whether they're community workers or organizers or educators, that give you examples of how to do this work, whether it's in a school classroom or in a community setting. And then also thinking about beyond the civil rights movement as we know it. And Katie talked about how it's often confined to the 1950s and 60s. The movement happened long before that, and it continues today. It also inspired other movements, from the American Indian movement, the Chicano movement, Asian American movement, to the movement for disability rights and LGBTQ rights, right? Like, we can look to many, many ways in which the various nonviolent actions, the stances that people took during the 1950s and 60s inspired many other groups. Katie, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll just say that Hassan Kwame Jeffries, who's a historian who wrote Understanding and Teaching the Civil Rights Movement, also has a fantastic podcast called Teaching Hard History, and it is amazing. There's some questions in the chat about, you know, how you teach racism to young kids, or lots of different questions, and all the seasons, every episode, start anywhere, listen to as much of it as you can. It's specifically for educators, and it is absolutely brilliant.
And I think season 1 of Teaching Hard History is about the civil rights movement. Season 2 is about Native histories. Is that right?
I think it's about slavery, but it dives into connections, like relationships between Native communities and enslaved people and the institution of slavery.
Maybe it's season 1 is slavery, season 2 is Native peoples, season 3 is civil rights movement. I think that
maybe.
Okay.
Oh,
Teaching Hard History is on the organization formerly known as Teaching Tolerance, now Learning for Justice. So if you go to their website, you'll find it there. Thanks.
Anywhere you find podcasts, you could just type in Teaching Hard History and Apple Podcast, Stitcher, whatever, it'll pop up.
Yeah. Alrighty, so I told y'all last time that I was going to talk about picture books today. And before I go into one specific example, I'm just going to give you a little bit more time to take a screenshot. These are phenomenal books that allow you to diversify the ways that you talk about the civil rights movement. And by using these different stories from different groups across different places and periods of time, you can really start to demonstrate the collective actions that took place and start to kind of decenter those particular heroes. Okay. 5 more seconds for anyone that needs a screenshot. All right, so I'm going to review some of the pitfalls that we've gone over by using a particular piece of children's literature that's gotten a ton of awards. I'm not keeping an eye on the chat because I get real distracted by it, but if you've read it, please shout it out in the chat if you've used it. So The Youngest Marcher is by Cynthia Levinson. It's illustrated by Vanessa Brantley Newton, and it's the story of Audrey Faye Hendricks, a young civil rights activist, supposedly the youngest participant in the Birmingham Children's March. Now, when I do this activity with students, I will usually do a read aloud or play a video read aloud. For the purposes of today's webinar, I'm not going to do that, but I am going to spotlight particular examples from the book and then demonstrate what you could do to supplement the book so that you can disrupt some of the pitfalls that we've been talking about. Okay, so quick excerpt. This is from the very beginning of the text. On the left side, Audrey says, I want to eat my ice cream inside Newberry's. I want to sit downstairs at the Alabama. The Alabama is a movie theater where Black people had to sit on the top level. I don't want hand-me-down school books, but stools at the counter, plush movie theater seats, books so fresh they'd crackle when you open them, those were for white children. So at the beginning of the book, Audrey is recounting the differences between the experiences of white children and the experiences of Black children like her. But when we think about the examples she's giving, while they definitely are things that would be important to a young child, they really simplify what segregation and the civil rights movement are about. So I think it's really important to consider this quote by Ella Baker, who said, sit-ins and other demonstrations are concerned with something much bigger than a hamburger or even a giant-sized Coke. Whatever may be the different approach to their goals, a Negro and white student are seeking to rid America of the scourge of racial segregation and discrimination, not only at lunch counters, but in every aspect of life. So really recognizing that it isn't just about being able to sit next to a white person in a restaurant. It's about not being dehumanized everywhere you go, feeling threatened when you're walking down the sidewalk, knowing that you will not have equal access to an education or just basic features like a water fountain, right? But it isn't only about not getting the nice thing. It's about being able to live freely and not constantly feel like you are not worthy or that you are not deserving. It's about a broader way in which you were treated as a human. It's not just about the privileges that you did not have access to. But the phrasing in the book really reduces it to those simple things. One of the things that I think is really interesting about this book is it's a rare example of a children's book that has illustrations of Ku Klux Klan members in full uniform. But the phrasing in this book is not always aligned with what we see in the illustration. So I'm going to read this page out loud. White store owners won't hire me. Ku Kluxers chased me. Policemen called me names. So those are the words that we're seeing. But if we look at the pictures, they don't quite match up. So we see the store owner kind of being like, all right, go away, to this Black man in a suit, but we don't have any context for why. The hooded Klansman picture is the one that I find the most concerning because I've never heard the KKK referred to as Ku Kluxers. So just that phrasing might be confusing. You might have some students that have heard of the KKK. You might have students that have never heard of the KKK. But this book is putting them right there on the page. You know students are going to ask you questions about why they're wearing those funny hats. So as an educator, this illustration opens up a door. And so I think it's important that you know how you want to respond to questions that students may have about this, but also just thinking about the fact that in this illustration, we see two hooded men that belong to a domestic terrorist group, one of which is holding a pitchfork and the other one that's holding a torch. We know, if you're familiar with the KKK in any substantive way, that it's a violent group. These things that they have on and that they're holding are meant to intimidate. And we can see that in the reactions in the illustrations of the family that's running away from them. But the text just says, Ku Kluxers chased me. Kids chase each other on the playground all the time, but it's not because that there's a bodily threat or a threat of violence. So the phrasing here has some dissonance with that illustration. And so I think there are opportunities for educators to push this further than what the text is offering, but there's also opportunities for educators to just read the line and move on and not attend to any of the stuff that's happening. And so if you have a student in your classroom who does know what the KKK represents, and you as an educator just speed through this and you don't attend to it, they're going to notice that. And they may not feel comfortable saying anything, but they're going to be thinking about that. So just a thing to keep in mind, because again, this is an award-winning book that a lot of people use and have in libraries across the nation. And then that last illustration, Policemen called me names. But if we look at that image, they're holding those nightsticks. Their mouths are not open. So the text is saying that the issue is names, but if we look at the picture, if we were to take that text away, it looks like she's worried they would hit her based on what they're doing with their bodies and with their hands. So again, this dissonance between what we see and what is written opens the door for educators to talk about racial violence if they want to, but also shields educators who kind of want to skip past that. What kind of an educator will you be? If you use this book, there's a path you can take that's going to be harder, but will be more truthful, or you could take the path that doesn't require you to have any hard conversations, but is also misleading.
Noreen, there are a couple of questions in the chat that I think now is a really good time to address this. Just thinking about for Black and Brown kids who do have historical or contemporary context for those pictures or even for those words, thinking about the ways that seeing this could be re-traumatizing or could stir things up for them, or even parents who are parents of color, in particular Black parents, if we're talking about the civil rights movement, who don't want their kids to learn about this, or who are worried about their kids learning about this. Can you just say a little bit about that? I think this is a good moment to address that.
I mean, I would hope that anyone that's teaching the civil rights movement is not doing it in a single day with a single book.
Right.
We know it happens. I've seen it happen in my teammates' classrooms. So one way to make sure that you are at least opening up communication is to let your students' families know that you're going to be covering a unit on the civil rights movement and ask if they have any concerns. I mean, I know sometimes it's hard to say that these are some of the books that we're going to be reading, but realistically in this day and age, knowing how many people are becoming suddenly upset about school curriculum and what books are being used when they didn't care before, it may not be a bad idea. Obviously, that's something you need to discuss with your administration and with your peers, but if you are giving folks a heads up that this is what we're covering in our social studies unit or in our language arts unit, at least that gives you an opportunity to communicate the general theme. And so if parents do have concerns, if guardians do have concerns, they can communicate that to you. But I wouldn't just like pick this book up for like a random read aloud. And that's kind of the point of what we're saying today, right? Like you have to teach it in broader context. You can't just do a one-off.
And teach it nested within a community that you're building with your students and their families. That's one of love and trust and care. Right? So I, as a white woman, what I'm thinking about is if I had a Black parent say, I'm really worried about you teaching the civil rights movement, that's a pretty reasonable concern, right? Like they have good reason to worry about that. And so we know that these topics can actually be taught in ways that can do harm, can be taught poorly. And so what are the relationships that I'm building with all the families and kids in my classroom so that we can have conversations, so that I can do check-ins with them? What kind of work am I doing to make sure that I have really strong content knowledge so that I understand what's happening, so that I feel a lot more confident and able to handle those concerns, right? And am I building connections with kids so that we feel like we are a community that cares about each other when we're learning about things that might be tricky, especially if there's like one Black kid in class that all the kids are going to turn and look at and say like, that looks like you, or that looks like your family, right? So that Noreen hit it on the head. Like we're to say like, oh, this is your read aloud for morning meeting, misses the point completely. These are deep, nested, thoughtful, long-standing kinds of issues and topics and themes and questions that you're wrestling with your students.
And I think we'll talk about that a little bit more next week.
Sure.
When we just kind of consider how you teach all of this stuff, because ideally you're working your way toward these kinds of conversations that are hard, that don't have easy answers, that you might need to say, hey, I don't know. I'm gonna try to learn a little bit more and I'll get back to you about that. And that's a process that takes time, and it needs to start at the beginning of the year, right? So like I would not read this book in month one of a new academic year, because you need some time, right? And I apologize, my dog seems to be very unhappy barking. So if it gets annoying, I will try to speed through and mute myself. Okay. So quick summary of what happens in this book. Audrey, along with many youth, decide that since adults are afraid to fill the jails, because they'll lose their jobs, they won't be able to support their families, young people, as young as Audrey, mostly middle and high schoolers though, decide that they're going to fill the jails, and they're going to walk out of school in like a mobilized way, And the police would pick them up and they would fill the jails until there was no more room. So in the text, in The Youngest Marcher, we see all these images of Audrey in isolation, all by herself. And they say things like she was locked in a day room with 24 other girls, but we're not really seeing that in the illustration. So again, there's this dissonance between what the text says and what the images show. Again, this is emphasizing her as an individual. And if we're trying to be intentional about moving away from heroification, what you could do is side by side with these illustrations, share primary sources that make clear that this was collective action. They ran out of space in the jails, and so they started using gyms, high school gyms, to put students. There were that many of them. There were thousands of young people that took action. And The Youngest Marcher doesn't make that clear in the illustration. So using primary sources can be a powerful way to make clear the actions of the collective. Another thing that I want to emphasize in this particular example, and I've been talking about a lot, this disconnect between image and text is so important. I'm going to open up my chat again. What do you observe here? What does this look like? All right, I'm seeing a lot of children deteriorating. Kids playing in the water, dancing. It's kind of hard to tell, right? So this is why it concerns me, because this is what the text says. Some days, many of them arrived sopping wet. A girl explained that firemen aimed powerful hoses at the children. Surging water spun them off their feet and down the street. But yeah, to Allison's point, it looks like fun here. I'm not getting the kind of violent spinning off their feet and down the street that the text is describing. So again, this is where using primary sources side by side can be super powerful. This is the Birmingham Fire Department, upon the orders of Commissioner Bull Connor, aiming fire hoses at young people. And in these pictures, you can see the force of the water against their bodies, how they're shielding their bodies from it. They're not enjoying this. They're not dancing. They're in pain. This gives us a very different sense from those illustrations. So again, putting them together gives kids a much better understanding of what was actually happening. As Katie mentioned, using passive voice, and I'm really trying to not look at the show like this, it is distracting. Again, when I say young children, you have to make that decision based on who you're teaching, where you're teaching, how it makes sense in your curriculum. I did this content when I taught 5th grade. I don't know that I would use a lot of this with younger children, but The Youngest Marcher is an incredibly popular book. People use it with a lot of different grade levels. And I think, I don't know. I don't know what the context is for their use of that book. If I were to use something like that, I would not use it for anything lower than 5th grade using the supplements that I'm describing here. But I think to someone's point in the chat, because of the explicit inclusion of the KKK, if you're not ready to have that conversation, then don't use this in 1st or 2nd grade, because what are you going to do when your students ask why those people are dressed that way? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to close the chat so I'm not distracted. Okay, Katie talked briefly about passive voice. These are some specific examples from The Youngest Marcher. Grown-ups talked about wiping out the segregation laws that kept Black and white people apart in Birmingham. The laws kept people apart. But didn't someone create those laws and enforce them? Taking away responsibility. She saw Black people stroll straight into stores and restaurants like they belonged there. Everything had changed. Black and white together, like we belong. These ideas around belonging are confusing, because if people belong together, then why were they being kept apart? So passive voice is making it really unclear as to why segregation existed in the first place if the reader is supposed to presume that that's wrong. Katie, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, this might be kind of a tangent, but thinking about own voices and thinking about the difference between the children's books that we sift through and look at, which is all the time. The ones that, I'm speaking in broad strokes here, but often it's outsiders that are using passive voice or are skirting issues or are using language that's clunky or awkward. And so be very intentional and thoughtful when you're looking at authors or illustrators of books that are able to speak very clearly and to speak very authentically from particular experiences or histories. That is in children's lit a really big problem. So just when you're looking for books, again, it's not to say that you shouldn't ever use, there is no book that is like completely unproblematic in any sort of way. It's about being deliberate and thoughtful about how we use it, what we supplement it with, etc. But that is just something that I have learned to get much better at looking at, like what, like there's just a trend. There are exceptions to this, but there's a trend that sometimes people are trying to talk like around things or talk about something in very superficial ways that tend to be people who don't have like a direct stake in that story, a personal stake in that story.
And we also know, like, broadly speaking, children's literature loves a happy ending.
Right.
So this book ends with that bottom line, black and white together, like we belong. Because that's a lovely way to end a story. And it's, you know, kids want to clap and they're happy, but then why are things still happening today where people are treated differently on the basis of race? I mean, clearly things did not get fixed. So being attentive to both passive voice hidden perpetrators and also that insistence on happy endings is important. And then this is just to note that we have to identify those perpetrators of injustice so that it's clear why people had to struggle and fight against them. We can't just talk about the fight without talking about what you're fighting against. All right.
Also, there were a couple, just another quick thing. Someone who posted in the chat asking about like accomplices or people, if we're talking about the civil rights movement, people who weren't Black who were participating, and that we have some children's lit shout outs because that's super important too, to show people who did take risks and who were in solidarity with people. Jean Trumpeter, Mulholland is the one I'm thinking of there. That we think those stories are super important so that kids can see themselves reflected. You know, one of the big critiques today is like, we're teaching white kids to hate themselves. And like, I'm white and I have white kids and I'm super excited for them to learn about this, not because they want to hate themselves, but so that we acknowledge our situation and that we can align ourselves with the people who fought against it and the people who were in solidarity. That's what I want them to learn about, right? So it's those stories of alliances and of solidarity are also really valuable. It's not just with this content, but this is kind of an obvious place to talk about that.
All right, my dog just got a squeaker toy. I'm sorry.
He's so cute.
I'm almost done and I can put myself on mute. I'm sorry.
I love it.
Okay. Alrighty, so creative solutions. This is a summary. Provide deeper context as to how and why segregation and racial injustice existed, and talk explicitly about who benefited from the maintenance of inequality. Again, this isn't necessarily a conversation that first and second graders are ready to have, or teachers of first and second graders are ready to have, and that's okay. But if you're going to go there, you have to talk about why these inequities and injustices exist in the first place. Also super important, kids don't really necessarily have a strong understanding of the past. So we have to emphasize that a lot of these events happen to people who are still alive. Ruby Bridges is still alive. There's lots of interviews that we can find on YouTube and elsewhere. There are community elders around us who can tell stories about these things. Like I said, there's some great documentaries that actually have accounts from participants of the sit-ins, of the Birmingham Children's Crusade, of the Freedom Riders, right? And so that's a really powerful way to learn about these things from the people that participated themselves. Engage students with those primary sources, especially alongside children's literature, so they can get a more historically grounded understanding. And you can read both with a text and against it. So just because a book is not perfect doesn't mean you got to throw it away. No one's saying that. In fact, sometimes if a book has problematic texts, illustrations, or some of those examples of dissonance between the two, that's a great opportunity for you to talk about, well, how would you have illustrated this? If we know that this is a primary source, what is something that you could draw instead? Or how would you change the text? Is there something else that you think we should add to this book? If someone's going to read this book, are there some primary sources that we should make sure that we could include? And then maybe we could caption those primary sources for readers, right? So there's a lot you can do, even if a book is not quite perfect. And we know that no book is perfect for all the things. And then lastly, focus on that collective and explore how the civil rights movement inspired other movements. And then one last thing, a lot of the pictures from this moment are available in color. So it's important to offer students those as well, instead of just all black and white. A lot of the work of photographer Gordon Parks in particular has been colorized. And these images are really powerful because we're not used to seeing images from this particular historical period in color. And I will hand it over to Katie after this. Okay, Katie brought this up actually. So if you've been following, and I'm sure you all have, as educators, the recent pushes for book bans, so-called anti-CRT and divisive concepts legislation, some people argue that to talk about this history of our nation, these kinds of examples, makes white children feel bad. Well, it should make all people feel bad because it's a terrible history. It's history that involves violence and dehumanization against an entire group of people. And some of that violence was at the hands of the people that are supposed to protect us, people who are supposed to serve us, like firefighters and government officials. They're not supposed to harm us, but in some cases, that's what they did. So this isn't targeting any group of children to feel bad because the children weren't the ones responsible.
Right.
But they can learn about the harms of the past and try to do better with each other and in the future. This is a country that's supposed to be founded on pluralist democracy and that supposedly believes in liberty for all, but we still aren't exercising those ideals. But we can encourage our students to fight for those ideals and to learn lessons from the past when people were denied their basic civil rights, denied their basic civil liberties, and try to do better.
And identifying agents of action and saying like, these were white people that were doing these things does not say that if you were white, you had to have been doing those things or that you were doing those things. There were white people who refused to do those things and who were part of the resistance and part of activism and organizing to push back. So there's no guarantee that if you are a white person, you're going to be part of all of this. But we will be if we don't learn about all of this in order to actively, consciously choose to not be part of it and to build relationships across difference and to be in solidarity with people. And this is just specific to race. We could talk about disability. We could talk about citizenship status. We could talk about gender, right? We could talk about all sorts of things. But when you're in a dominant group, when I think about my dominant identities, I absolutely want to understand how people with my identity have done harm so that I cannot be part of that and I can be part of what is trying to make it better. And I know if I don't learn about that, I have a much greater chance that I'm going to inadvertently do harm, right? And I don't want to be part of that. I don't want my kids to be part of that, right? So just another 2 cents there.
And now my dog is nice and calm.
He's so cute. The one last thing about the civil rights movement is, and this is just a quick caveat, if the only Black history that you're ever teaching is about slavery and the civil rights movement, please start teaching more Black history than just that, because I get parents concerned that their kids' history is only taught through the lens of oppression. That's a problem, and that's not right, right? So there are ways that we want to make sure that we're making room for joy and creativity and not seeing everything through that lens. That's really important. And it's really important to include this information as well. There's just always so many ways that we could keep going for like 85 different 90-minute sessions, but just a little put a pin in it for that. Okay, now I'm going to close the chat because I totally agree. I'm getting like distracted by the chat, not in a bad way. I appreciate people posting. All right, the last little bit that we're going to talk about today has to do with the last problem that we've identified when we are trying to teach for equity and justice. And this has to do with dramatization and gamification. And this is when we are tempted to center fun and when we're tempted to prioritize student engagement as the most important thing or the only thing that we're thinking about, especially when we're teaching about anything that might involve some kind of trauma or complexity or inequity, right? That when we're trying to teach about those things in any way, we need to be really, really careful before we dramatize and gamify things. And at the elementary level, especially, we see this a lot, especially this propensity towards cuteness, right? Boop. Okay, we're going to talk about the example of teaching westward expansion that I'm putting in quotes because even naming the unit westward expansion already raises red flags for us. That to talk about the nation building, to talk about colonial settlement, to talk about genocide, but to name it westward expansion privileges a particular framing of the story. So actually one question that I asked my students as we were wrestling with a lot of this information was, what should we even call this time period and who should get to decide? And that's an open question, right? And something my students had lots of different answers about what it should be called and why that were really thoughtful. Some I agreed with, some I didn't. That's like the beauty of that kind of teaching. But when we talk about dramatization and gamification, one of the content areas that we see this taught a lot is when elementary teachers are teaching about really like the period between 1840 and 1900-ish, and teaching about the westward expansion of US settlers into native territories. So there, I'm sure you all can think of lots of examples. We've got the Oregon Trail game, which is probably, I know it's still out there, but probably aging us a little bit. That was the very first computer game I ever played in my life, was Oregon Trail and Math Blaster, the two video games we had available at my elementary school. But any sort of simulation like that, where you're asked to take on a character, we know that there are story path activities where it might not be a video game, but you have like task cards that students are choosing. If you get onto Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers, there are tons of these task card packs that you can pick that are basically like the Oregon Trail, but not on a computer. What we are concerned about with often a lot of these simulations or games or play acting that students are doing is that they can often be really, really confusing. And that for a lot of students, the analogs are not remotely clear, and they think they're literally just playing a game, right? They don't understand that we're talking about like intense actual experiences that happen to people, and that if the focus is on this game and fun, it becomes kind of like a flip thing that they're doing, and can often reinforce stereotypes that they're bringing to the classroom, which is the opposite of what we want to be doing when we're teaching students, right? We don't want to be reinforcing, especially really deeply hurtful, harmful stereotypes. Noreen, please chime in at any point here. We also, this was another example. Things have not honestly changed that much when it comes to this content specifically from when we were kids. I live close to, when I was a kid, this farm. It was called Living History Farms. And it's like they had like an Indian farm and then an 1800s farm and a 1900s farm. And it's all documenting history of this rural part of the country. And so we dressed up like this, and we went to the one-room schoolhouse, and we had a pail, and we wrapped our sandwiches in wax paper, and we had like a whole day where we were pioneer children, right? Every single thing we were taught was from the perspective of the settlers, and we were asked to be settlers. I'm actually descended from people who came in covered wagons to this state. This is actually my family's history, but it is not serving me well to just reinforce that uncritically without thinking about other perspectives. And it's certainly damaging to kids whose ancestors would have been enslaved or would have been pushed off their homelands in this process, to ask them to come and cosplay people who were involved in settlement and genocide and enslavement, right? So it's not to denigrate. I want to learn about my family. There are things I'm really proud about with my family, right? But it's a deeper, more contextualized, nuanced understanding of these histories. And a lot of these are events that making them fun really denigrates and erases a lot of the histories that are really, really sad. Like when we think about the displacement, the theft of land for Native people, that is not something that I would ever ask kids to reenact or ever ask kids to like play pretend at. I want to teach them about it, but there are way better strategies for teaching them about that than asking them to like put on costumes and play, right? Noreen, anything to add to that? I'm just going to keep asking you and you're going to keep just
I think for the sake of time, I'm just going to let you roll through.
Okay, great. Then we also want to think about the ways, and I mentioned this a little bit, that to have kids, when you are trivializing trauma and you're making it fun and you're making it a game, that for kids whose families were on the receiving end of harm or damage, that is incredibly painful. We could talk about this with lots of content areas. Noreen and I have a file where we keep track of news articles about how slavery gets taught in elementary schools, where they're reenacting slave auctions, or reenacting like escaping as an enslaved, like all of these things that are just really traumatizing, that again, it's not that we wouldn't want kids to learn about it, but to do it in this way feels especially damaging. So thinking about the ways that kids are asked to engage in role play, you're totally fine. And then having other people even play them, just have it be really awkward at best, right? If not re-traumatizing kids in particular ways. Boop. So we put together this flow chart. I actually love simulations. I was in theater. I love the theater arts. I think kids' dramatic play is incredibly powerful and beautiful. So I actually think these teaching tools are great, but they are very powerful teaching tools, and we need to wield them very, very thoughtfully and carefully. So we have this decision tree, basically, to think about if and when you use these teaching tools like games, like simulations, like play acting with kids. So is your priority fun? If it is, great. Don't apply those teaching tools to this topic. Find something else to do that is purely fun for kids. We are not anti-fun, right? Great. Just don't use those strategies for this particular content. If it's not fun, and if it's like learning about something that's hard or complex, you still might be able to do it, but then you have to think about, okay, what's my classroom community? Do kids trust each other? Is the level of care really deep, so that if kids aren't comfortable or are feeling hurt, that they can share that and we can stop and debrief and start to work together? If we don't, then that should be our priority for lots of reasons to build a better, stronger community, but definitely we shouldn't be using these options. Is your background knowledge strong? If not, go build that background knowledge first so that you can make those direct connections and those analogs super, super clear. For instance, I partnered with a Native educator here in Central Iowa who created this really incredibly powerful simulation for my students. She led it as a Meskwaki Winnebago woman. And then we had ample time afterwards to debrief and make the very explicit direct connections to actual historical events. That actually took way longer than the simulation that she did with them, right? We were dedicating lots and lots of time and space for that. Is there a way to make an analog? If no, then it depends on whether you want to do something that's really like historically real versus like a simulation, or the best way to say it is an analog, an activity that you can then make connections to, like, oh, what we just did is like this other thing. And do you have time to debrief? If you don't do this, because you need to debrief, you need to break it down. But that being said, there can be really powerful, wonderful examples of how to do this. You just want to be, again, very deliberate, very, very, very thoughtful about what you're opening up and what you're asking kids to imagine or to play act or to do. We have some creative solutions specific to westward expansion, some resources to share, but really this advice would go for any content that we're thinking about, is making sure that, to me, the strongest simulations or games are ones that do provide some distance and abstraction, so that it allows kids to really immerse themselves without the fear of doing some really like interpersonal harm with kids. We've also seen people do simulations where teachers assign characters based on kids' actual identities. Please, for the love of God, don't do that, right? So the more you can abstract it, that helps prevent some of that harm. You just have to make sure every time you abstract it a little bit more, that you're adding more time for debriefing, because kids are going to need help making those connections. We also want to think about, as I mentioned before, I have so just loved the collaborations and partnerships, and have found organizations and communities thrilled to partner with me and to make sure that the teaching of their histories and their communities is being done in a really respectful, responsible way, and to be critical friends to help me notice things that I wouldn't have known before. That's true of any content. Specific to westward expansion, these are some of the resources that we've really enjoyed. The National Museum of the American Indian has Native Knowledge 360, which has a ton of awesome resources. The one that I'm wanting to shout out here is a book, Teaching Critically, about Lewis and Clark, Challenging Dominant Narratives in K-12 Curriculum. It's not just about Lewis and Clark, but really in thinking about colonialism, settler colonialism, empire building, and how to be really thoughtful and centering Indigenous voices as we teach about that, and doing it in really creative, engaging ways that aren't trivializing trauma, that aren't re-traumatizing kids. Okay, I think we do have some time for questions, and this is my favorite Abbott Elementary moment ever, is when they're talking about turkeys, I think. Do you remember this scene, right?
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah.
Like, what if the turkey is pregnant? And it's like, great question. Just how kids are so brilliant, and kids' questions and the way that they're thinking about the world is amazing. And the kind of teaching that we're talking about for equity and justice is making space for those questions and making space for those connections to come alive for kids, right? It's not about imposing my partisan views on them. It's not about imposing, like, you would need to believe this about that. It's about creating space for these brilliant minds to flourish, to engage with each other, and to wrestle with really difficult, interesting, fascinating human questions about the world around them. Kids are desperate for that. They're good at that. We just need to do whatever we can to keep those fires lit and breathing in schools, especially at the elementary level.
Okay, Katie, I see that you answered this in the Q&A, but for folks who haven't looked there, and also there was another question that I did catch. Where can people find a list of books that we've recommended today?
Noreena's teasing me because when we were writing our book, I was like wanting to insert our web address wherever I could, because there was so much that we couldn't put in the book, but there's so much more that we have online. So www.ssfabw.com, socialstudiesforabetter world.com, has tons of children's books, adult books, podcasts, resources, all sorts of things, organizations that we have found incredibly helpful to our pedagogy and to our curriculum building. So please check these out. Oh, I did just see a question from Sam about if there's ever a time to use gamification or dramatization when it comes to these issues. So I'll just tell you a little bit about this simulation that I collaborated with my friend who is Native herself and is just a genius educator and just incredible. So she had set it up basically to have kids walk through and think about their home, like a place that's really, really special to them. And they had to write that out on a piece of paper. And then the people who are really special to them, right? And so then she's walking them through, like, aliens are coming to Earth and they have discovered that there's a metal in the soil that they need for their spaceships. And so they land on Earth and they really want this metal. And so they've, told everybody, you have to move. What do? She had these decision points. Well, obviously these aren't alien invaders, but the analog are Americans that are encroaching and wanting gold, let's say, or wanting land. And so as the simulation unfolds with these aliens, she has all these different decision points where students have to decide, do you stay, do you go, do you fight, what do you do? And then they destroy these places that are special to you. There are people who you love who don't make it, right? So it's this really just super engaging activity that then when they start to learn about the historical analogs, and again, this is with upper elementary, I think this is too abstract for little kids for sure. But it was really fantastic. So just as an example, it can be done, but it has to be done with just the utmost care and precision and collaboration with folks. Noreen, what were some other questions?
We don't have that particular simulation available because it's not ours.
Right.
Yeah. Someone asked for that in the chat.
Right.
And then there was another question about recordings. You will receive a link for tonight's recording tomorrow via email, and it's good for 1 week. Okay. So there are a few questions we've gotten about, like, racism broadly, talking to kids about race. My flippant answer is that's a separate webinar.
I know.
That's more than we can talk about in 5 to 10 minutes. So Katie, I'll pick one of those questions because there's just some stuff that we can't, without like having a better knowledge of your context and who you are, who your students are, what kind of administrative support you have. We can't necessarily like give advice that works for everybody. But I think this question attends to something that's probably pretty common for some folks. When children of color are few in number in a classroom and the majority of children are white Euro-Americans, how can you best support the one or small handful of kids of color?
Are you asking me that question?
I'm asking you, and then I can say what I think. But
okay.
These all are asking some like very meaty questions.
I know that are so hard to either type an answer to or to say, like you said, in a few minutes at the end in a Q&A. I mean, again, to me, my knee-jerk reaction is to say it so depends on the community that you're building. And if you're helping kids learn about each other as whole people, complex whole people. So no kid is just their racialized identity, right? Know that kids really know each other, appreciate each other, can talk about tough things, have questions, that kind of community building can go so far. So ideally, and like Noreen said, that we're never just like plunging them in the deep end of these conversations with no context or no support. And that when we're talking about these kinds of equity issues, justice issues, that we're not talking about them just in relation to race either. So that it's not isolating kids as like, oh, this is your time to, like, we're all going to turn to look at you, because we're learning about all sorts of different communities. We're learning about all sorts of different dimensions of our identities. And so it makes it less unique or like strange that we're talking about this really hard, intense thing only in relation to this one part of these kids' identities, right? So I have other thoughts, but that's at least a little something.
Yeah, I mean, the community building aspect is super important, but like Katie said, your students shouldn't ever feel like they stand out because of some aspect of their identity that's not shared by everyone. Like, it should be really clear in the development of your classroom community that one person is never meant to represent an entire group of people. Often white students would never be expected to be a representative for their race, yet oftentimes if we flip it, the one immigrant student, the one Jewish student, the one whoever's the one, right? Like, whatever student isn't part of the norm, you know, anytime you talk to someone who was that one in their class, they always talk about like the time that their teacher pointed them out and like asked them to explain their culture, their entire group of people, based on whatever identity, to the class, as if their experience could then reflect all of those others, right? Like, I think it's just really important that we try to not do that. And we make it clear that we won't do that as educators. And we give young people an invitation to share, but also, like, if we know that we're going to talk about something, like, if you have a good relationship with a student and hopefully you're building that, right? Like, you can say, hey, we're going to talk about, I don't know, let's say we have a student from Canada. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about Canada, or next week we're going to talk about Canada. Is there anything that you would like to share? Anything that you want me to know before I start planning out how we do that? So that if you have students that perhaps aren't as forthright, you at least give them a heads up so that you know how they feel about it, right? Like, that's one way you could do it if you're still working to establish that community. But you got to build relationships. So regardless of whatever identities you're focusing on, that students know that you're not going to tokenize them, but also, like, if their peers start to do it, you're gonna interrupt that, right? One thing that I've always found very frustrating is, and I see this a lot with the student teachers I work with, like, they'll hear someone say a racial slur or some sort of other slur that's connected to identity, and the teacher will say, oh, that's not nice, and brush it off without seeing how the child who was called the slur is feeling, how they received that. It's this notion of impact versus intent, right? Like, even if the kid that said the thing didn't know what it meant, it still was meant to be hurtful, and the child was still hurt by that. So you have to have a conversation about it. When teachers blow it off, that's when kids really start to internalize things and know that that teacher's not going to stand up for me. That's not a person I can talk to. So when you hear those kinds of harmful terms used, whether it's racially based or otherwise, it's really important that we talk about not just how it's not nice, but how it's harmful and it's hurtful, and it comes from this history that's meant to insult and denigrate people. And we don't do that in our community. We don't all have to be friends, but we do have to be respectful.
I'm thinking too, and I say this again as an educator who has a lot of dominant identities, you know, not everything, but enough, and like really powerful, potentially dangerous ones, that I need to get myself right. Like, I have to do a lot of like learning, unlearning, self-reflection, etc. And somebody said this in the chat earlier about how often adults are way more uncomfortable with these conversations than kids are. Kids learn to be uncomfortable with these conversations from adults. So thinking about the times that I have been teaching with kids or even teaching with adults, like when they say something, especially if they share something about themselves with me, they are watching for how I react and respond. They're tracking that and, logging. Did she freak out? Did she dismiss me? Like, was I trying to share something about my reality with her and she brushed it off? Or did she want to listen? Did she want to learn more? Did she take me seriously? And the more that I don't let my own stuff get in the way, the more that I'm listening and like validating and affirming and acknowledging kids sharing parts of themselves with me, then that often helps mitigate harm that could happen to you, that kids know they'll feel valued as whole kids. And that again is kids who have lots of minoritized, marginalized identities. That's kids with dominant identities. That's just like anyone in my classroom that I'm thinking about trying to build those relationships with.
And I think just making sure that not just at the beginning of the year, but throughout the year, you have conversations about how words matter and the names that you use to describe people, the words that you use can harm or they can help, or, maybe they don't do either of those things, but there are definitely some words that can be painful when someone is called those words, right? And so someone in the chat earlier today talked about like learning like the racist history behind going Dutch. Right? Like there's all kinds of phrases that have become part of our vernacular that actually stem from like really messed up histories and depictions of people, but we don't know those histories, so we don't even know why they're problematic. And so like finding some opportunities, although kids will give you plenty, right? Because kids are learning a lot about language and are trying out things that they hear.
Totally.
When kids use words that are offensive, when kids use words that are inappropriate, and I think someone mentioned this in the chat, talk about it. Don't just say that's not nice, we don't do that at school.
Right.
Have a conversation about language, impact versus intent, and words, and just trying to do better. If you slip up, model, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm trying not to say that. That was my bad. Like, just do that. And if you can model that for your students, hopefully they'll start to take that up once they become more reflective of how the words that they use can sometimes accidentally hurt someone, but you need to think about the impact more than what you meant.
Yep. I will say too, Equity Literacy Institute has tons of other resources for some of these broader questions around equity or racism specifically, whether they are workshops that they run kind of all the time or web series that are in a library so that you can, get access to them and watch them in terms of like, there's a question here about colleagues, there's a question about student interactions, a lot of these like more foundational equity issues, ELI has tons of resources for those for sure. So we really appreciate those questions. We're not trying to brush them off, but there are great resources out there that I think can better tackle those.
And with more time dedicated to them. But we can also make sure that we share some of those next week when we talk about how to actually engage in a lot of this work.
Yeah, that's great. So next week we are talking about just teaching for equity and justice at the elementary level in this current climate, in this context, how to do it effectively, how to do it with love, how to do it in ways that build relationships and community, and to do it responsibly, to do it professionally. And we have tons and tons of research we can draw from. Teaching is a very highly skilled profession. What we're talking about is, especially with young kids, incredibly sophisticated work. And it's one of the reasons why we want there to be as much training and support for teachers and not just toss them in as possible. So thank you so much, everybody, tonight. I'm sure there are a million other things that I'll be laying awake tonight wishing I had mentioned or said, but we'll see you all for one more week. And thank you for your participation tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, y'all.
And of course, we just give them a minute. Like, they know we're streaming, but we'll wait for them to kick us out.
Thanks,
I have
everyone.
so many thoughts.
Night.
I feel like we've
Thank
just had a whole conversation.
Thank you.
I feel like we've just had a whole
there
engagement.
Are such great questions here, but yeah, more than we can get into in one session for sure.
No. I was like, I cannot answer this.
They were totally watching
2
our
to 3
stream.
sentence.
I wonder if they'll tune in right after right after they shut down the webinar.
I know we could hear Gizmo squeaking just a little bit, but now you can probably hear the kids running upstairs.
I'm looking forward
like,
to. I have thoughts.
Oh yes,
I have thoughts that I would like to share.
It's like either they're gonna play right next to me or right on top of me. Those are the two places where they have toys. So
I'm gonna screenshot our questions and then save the chat, and then if you want to shut it down.
Yeah, great.
Shut
okay.
it down.
I will talk to you soon. I hope you have a great night.
Give me a sec. Let me save the chat real quick. I'm still screenshotting the answered questions, just so we know.
Okay.
And save chat. All right, we're good.
Okay.
Bye. See you next week. Bye. Well. That was interesting. I was not expecting to be called out live on their stream, but ladies, I want to speak directly to the presenters because I know that that they'll probably be. I bet they're tuning in right now. Hi guys. So thank you for welcoming us into your stream. Now, I do want to say, you know, I appreciate the fact that you didn't kick me out of the webinar, because if you guys had actually paid attention to the stream from last week, you absolutely could have figured out my name. You absolutely could have figured out my email address. You absolutely could have figured out precisely how to kick me out from all of your future webinars. That was 100% an option on the table. You didn't do that. And I appreciate that you didn't do that. And you know, I appreciate that you acknowledged us. I appreciate that you wrote a statement for us. Now, I do want to take a close look at the statement that they wrote, especially for us, because they knew that we were streaming on the internet. I know it's a little bit hard to read. I wonder if I can make it a little bit bigger. No, I can't make the image bigger, but I will read the statement to the naysayers. A note to they wrote us, guys, they were literally interacting with us throughout that webinar. Don't you feel like we just had an entire conversation with them? I feel like we're basically best friends. A note for the naysayers. Some folks, FOLKS, I have to give them credit for that and not using FOLX, like the ones behind recent book bans and so-called anti-CRT and divisive concept legislation, argue that this kind of work we're encouraging is designed to make white children feel bad. Well, ladies, here's the thing. You should really know who you're speaking to before you make statements, because I have been specifically incredibly critical of all book banning efforts. I have called out Moms for Liberty on the book banning. I call out conservatives all the time on the book banning. I know you guys probably think I'm like an alt-right Nazi conservative. I'm actually not. Neither are the people in my chat. Most of us do not agree with book banning at all in any way, and have been some of the more vocal people on that. But the thing of it is you guys are employees of the state. Well, there's a couple things. Number one, and this was said at the beginning of the stream, and I think this bears repeating, you are teaching teachers how to teach children. You should not be doing that in private. We should be able to see exactly what the teachers are teaching the children. We should be able to see how they're being trained. These are children. They are not our kids. They are not your kids. They are the children of the parents who sent them to the school. They are not your children. Stop treating them like they are your children. But that anti-CRT legislation, the divisive concepts bill, guess what? That is meant to put restrictions on the government. When you are a public school employee, you do not have free speech. This has already been ruled on by the Supreme Court. We can absolutely put restrictions on what you are allowed to teach children when you make assumptions that they are your children rather than the children of parents. This puts restrictions on the federal government. This does not put restrictions on individual liberties. This puts restrictions on the federal government. When teachers are teaching in their capacity as public school employees, they are agents of the state and they do not have free speech. So too bad, so sad. You are just upset that we were better at activism than you were on this particular front. Let's continue with their statement. Learning about this history should make all people feel bad. Why do you want to make children feel bad? It is horrible to witness such violence and dehumanization occur against an entire group of people, especially at the hands of folks like firefighters and government officials who are supposed to be in service to the community, not to harm members of it. Now, these teachers, these women, I don't even know if they're still teachers. You guys might be surprised to understand that I actually agree with you on this point. I don't actually think that we should be teaching kids that like cops are good people. I don't think cops are good people. I think any conservative that still backs the blue after what happened in 2020 and after what happened on January 6th and after every single time the police have absolutely failed to do their job based on political affiliation, I absolutely believe that any conservative that still backs the blue has like had the wool pull over their eyes. I was chased like by a Black Lives Matter mob in Dallas, Texas, outside of the Dallas police station. When we called them for help, no one came to help us. The police aren't going to protect you. I don't think we should be teaching that the police are good people. So on this point, we might actually have some common agreement. But we are not blaming anyone but the people who enacted these harms. Well, that's actually not the point. Today's young people are not responsible for white supremacy and racial violence, but they can learn about our nation's problematic histories and work towards building a better society that actually centers on democracy and liberty for all. No one is opposed to children learning accurate history. No one's opposed to that. I'm not opposed with kids learning about slavery. I'm not opposed to kids learning about the civil rights movement. I'm not opposed. I liked some of your ideas. I liked the idea of diversification of story. I thought the idea that you had about colorizing black and white photos and using those was actually really good, because I do agree that when you colorize photos, it gives you a different perspective. So I actually think you had some good suggestions about how to teach different stories. However, the problem that we have is not teaching history, is not teaching slavery, is not teaching any of these things. The problem that we have is that you are teaching children to be activists. That is not your job. It is not your job, especially at the elementary school level, to be teaching children to be activists. The things that you should be teaching children are to read, to write, to do math, to understand the world that existed before they were born, not based on your political affiliation or not based on any sort of idea of what collective action you want them to take when they're adults. That is not the point. You should not be teaching that in public schools. We should not be paying your taxpayer salary for you to be indoctrinating children into your ideology that is going to set them up to be little activists for the rest of their lives, and not even understanding the full breadth and perspectives of different forms of history, because that's not what you teach. You teach one singular perspective of history. You just said don't allow kids to play cowboys and Indians. It's a fucking game. Pull the stick out of your ass. They are children. They're children. And you know what I think the most ironic part of this entire experience is? They obviously edited and finagled their content because they knew we would be watching. They did not understand who we were. They did not understand what we believe. I'm sure they think that Chris Rufo is like the devil incarnate when he's actually like a really nice guy. And you know, it was like they actually had some good ideas in this webinar. Listen, I gave them credit in the last webinar. I think that they had some good ideas in the last webinar. I think that their ideas about, you know, not celebrating holidays in which all children can't be included in the celebration, I actually think that that was kind of nice. I think there are different ways that you can do that. I thought that some of their ideas in this webinar were good. I actually don't think that they made some horrendous points in this webinar. I actually thought that like this is not even, dude, we just exposed the Burlington School District for grooming elementary schoolers to become trans. Like the webinar that we watched today is not actually the worst thing that we've ever seen. It's like on a scale of 1 to 10, it was maybe a 4. But the fact that they got so defensive, they were so pissed we were watching. They were so pissed. You could tell. Like the one on the bottom there, not the white one, the other one, because we have to do everything about race, right? Like she was pissed. And she would get on some tears, and I was like, "Ooh, honey, you gotta stop being so defensive. You're coming across as really, really angry. Like, I didn't disrupt your webinar. I let you say whatever you wanted to say. And you got defensive. And it wasn't becoming. It wasn't becoming. And it kind of makes me question, what were you doing with those 5th grade kids if they tried to question you? Because all I did was show your webinar on the internet. A webinar, by the way, that I paid for. And by the way, when I signed up for this webinar, when I signed up and paid for this webinar, I didn't have to agree to anything saying I wouldn't stream it on YouTube. how I kind of view this, I view my act as an act of civil disobedience, right? Like you guys want people to be activists. You guys embrace collective activism, right? Like that's all your thing. You're literally teaching 5 to 10-year-olds how to be activists in the books you just showed us in this webinar. What we're doing here on this stream with streaming your webinar, it's just activism. We're just taking collective action. That's all it is. How I kind of view my actions of ignoring their requests to not record their webinar, I view it as a nice, like, good old civil disobedience, right? It's kind of like when Will Smith slapped the shit out of Chris Rock at the Oscars, and then apparently the Academy Awards politely asked Will Smith to leave, and Will Smith was like, nope, not leaving, sitting in my chair, and I'm winning my Oscar. I view this as the exact same thing. I didn't sign anything when I paid you for access to your webinar series that said that I would not record and stream your webinar on YouTube. I did not sign anything to that effect. You had no terms of conditions. This is your fault for not doing your due diligence. And you can politely ask me not to record all you want, and I can politely decline. And I can let you say whatever you want to say without being disruptive. I didn't do anything in your chat, mostly because I didn't want you to know who I was and kick me out. Also because it's not the point. Like, disrupting what they're doing is not actually the point. I just want people to actually see what they're doing. Goth Goblin says teachers should be teaching how to think, not what to think. Yeah, I think that that's exactly right. You notice they talked about censoring the language of children at the end. Emphasize, oh my God, Dems are going to get rid of Black History Month. I mean, I don't think anyone's arguing to get rid of Black History Month. What else? What other notes did we have on this webinar? I actually don't think this webinar was that bad, honestly. Like, I kind of think that both of these women and probably many of the teachers in the chat, I think they're mostly useful idiots. I've talked about this a lot in that I think that most of the people who subscribe to this ideology, they don't actually understand what it is. They're doing it because they think that it's what they need to do in order to be good people. And so I was, oh, and I wanted to say too, listen, man, I'm sad that that her family is having problems. I mean, that makes me very sad. Guess what? My husband's from Ukraine. His country's currently at war. His brother's in the Ukrainian army. My husband's family's city is currently being bombed. You are not the only people with problems. Okay? So I do have actually great sympathy for the fact that she's having some family problems. However, I do think bringing it up at the beginning of this webinar in conjunction with us streaming it was incredibly emotionally manipulative. Maybe she doesn't realize she's being emotionally manipulative, but I think it was incredibly emotionally manipulative to do that. That was not cool, man. Like, that was, and especially when she went back and was, like, totally fine for the rest of the week, but she cried at the beginning after she talked about us streaming, and then her family has cancer, which again is very sad, and I wish them well, and I hope they get better, and, I don't wish that on anyone. Again, my husband's family is currently at war. It sucks. We are waiting to get that phone call any single day that his brother is no longer with us because he's in the army actively fighting in the war right now. But you don't cry on a webinar to use it as emotional manipulation because you are upset that you got outplayed and I streamed your webinar on the internet. That is a manipulative, dude. It's not cool. Not cool. Not okay. All right. So apparently we're doing another one next week. I mean, I hope I get invited back. I hope that they don't actually figure out who I am and kick me out. And if they do, they should probably refund my money since they didn't actually fulfill the service that I paid for. So apparently we're doing that next week. Now I'm really looking forward to next week because apparently it's about teaching. Like next week is basically our week. Okay, let's see what the description says. Elementary teaching amidst fear and panic. This is they should thank their lucky stars that we're streaming this on the internet. This is going to add a whole new dimension for them. This is going to make the fear and panic of what is going on in education so real because they know they're being watched. Teaching for equity and justice at the elementary level has always been complex, but it can be especially fraught right now in the face of organized, well-funded resistance. There are, however, many strategies that can help protect and even build support for this work. See, look at this is their Eventbrite page. There ain't nothing on this page that says I can't record this and stream it on YouTube. Ain't nothing on it that says I can't do what I'm doing. Haha, too bad, so sad. So we'll be streaming that next week live on this channel. Now, I am actually not a well-funded activist. Believe it or not. Believe it or not, I am not. I'm not Chris Rufo, man. I don't work with Heritage Foundation. I don't have my own thing. I don't, and that's purposeful, by the way. I don't really want to be. I like being scrappy and like bad news bears, and I like having my unwoke army, and like we're all just like piecing this together. And the reason that I don't actually like having allegiance to anyone is I don't want anyone telling me what I can and cannot do and can and cannot say on the internet. That's deeply important to me. B, I don't want to be subservient to anyone else's political agenda. And if I went to work for one of these like nonprofits or activist groups that are springing up, and don't think I haven't had the opportunity, like I feel like I would be subservient to someone else's agenda, and I don't want that, particularly not with what's going on with the conservatives right now with the book banning. Because like I said, I really do not agree with the book banning in any way, shape, or form. I get it. I don't want porn taught in schools either. I don't want that genderqueer book in schools. I think that's bad. But I think you have to change the culture in order to do that, because when it comes to book banning, that's a slippery slope, man. And if you think that they're only going to ban the books that you don't like, no, 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 no. They're going to come for the books that you like too. That's the way it always works. And so, yes, well, I think it is problematic that books like genderqueer are taught in schools, and I would rather that not happen. I would rather students see a comic about sex than make banning books part of our movement. And I know that's hard for some people to hear, but I have to break it to you. Your little darlings are going to learn about sex someday anyway. And that is far less dangerous. It's not ideal. It's far less dangerous than putting us on the slippery slope of censorship with book banning. Okay? So we just have to make our priorities, and I'm a free speech absolutist, and that's where I've come down on it. So there are many reasons that I'm not a well-funded activist. I'm sure they think I am with this YouTube channel. But the way that you can support the work I'm doing, because I am entirely funded by you. My work is entirely funded by ad dollars on this channel. It is entirely funded by merchandise sales and PayPal donations, but mostly it comes from my locals community. This is the probably the primary source. This is the primary source of my funding for the work that I'm doing. So if you really want to support the work, please head over to kb.locals.com/support. You can sign up for $5 a month. You can sign up for $50 a year, which gives you 2 months for free. You can make a one-time gift, and all of that is greatly appreciated. We have a Bitchcraft coming up on Saturday at 3 p.m. You can come hang out on a private Zoom call, not streamed on the internet, and hang out and knit or do whatever you want to do. We have community Zooms on Mondays at 7 p.m. and Wednesdays at noon. If you want to get in on the Unwoke Army action, which is the group that Ben Shapiro just stole our journalism, but we'll forgive him because at least he spread the message, but he stole our journalism. We were the ones that did the work that Ben Shapiro covered. We were the ones that did the work that Laura Ingraham covered last night. Even PragerU stealing my work, not giving me credit. They'll ban me off their site and take my video down, but they'll steal my journalism and talk about it in a video. That's fine. But all this stuff from the Burlington, Vermont school system that's coming out, that's my Unwoke Army, and my Unwoke Army is grounded in my locals community. If you want access to it, there is a whole video that I just posted on this channel today explaining how you can become a member of the Unwoke Army, but you do need to be a local supporter, at least right now, in order to do it. And that's not, and by the way, guys, this is actually not like a money-making thing for me. In fact, I'll give you a promo code. If you can't afford the $5. Put Unwoke into the monthly promo code. That's going to give you a free month. The reason that you need to become a local supporter in order to be in my Unwoke Army is that I want to meet you and talk to you and make sure you're not a psycho. And the place I do that is in my community Zooms. And you can't get access to my community Zooms unless you're a local supporter. See how all that works? There's got to be a screening process, man. I'm deadly serious. There's going to be no bullshit. There's going to be no drama. There's going to be no bickering. There's going to be none of this infighting nonsense that goes on Twitter in my Unwoke Army. I will not have it. And so I do screen people to make sure you're not psychotic. And then once I decide that you're like normal and aren't going to be a total douche in my Discord, that's when you get access to the Unwoke Army community Discord. And that's where the real work is being done right now. We are working hard right now to follow up on the story from Burlington. I've got whistleblowers reaching out to me right now. I've had 2 whistleblowers reach out for me today. I've got a couple media requests coming in. So people are starting to pick this up, but there's a lot more to be done on the Burlington stuff. So that's where we're going to be doing that, is in the Unwoke Army Discord. Now, another way you can support my work is by pre-ordering my book, Actively Unwoke. I just got the print version. I just got it today, 10 minutes before this stream. Look at this. It's so pretty. It's so good. Oh, it looks so good. I'm so excited about this book. You can pre-order the book now on Amazon. And you can order it other places too. But Amazon's usually the best place. You can get the hardcover audiobook or Kindle version right now. It is released on May 10th. So, pre-order away, guys. The more pre-orders, the better. If you're looking for an autographed copy, those will be coming soon. And yeah, if you don't want to give your money to Amazon, go to Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. I don't know, your local booksellers. It's all over the place. You can go to Simon & Schuster's website and find out all the other places that you can get it. Well, I do hope they invite us back for next time. I am actually serious about that. But tomorrow, on my second channel, actually, I'll put it in. I don't have it picked out yet what we're going to do. Now, guys, remember, last week for Happy Hour, we actually uncovered something that is currently making national news. So, on my second channel, Actively Unwoke, every Friday at 5 p.m., we do Happy Hour. Happy Hour is when we watch a woke training, and I have some beers and we comment on it. Now, last week, you can actually see we watched the Vermont school district last week. That Happy Hour was the thing that resulted in the Unwoke Army breaking the news about what is going on in the Burlington schools. It all happened at Happy Hour. You guys are never going to want to miss a Happy Hour again. I don't know what training we're watching yet. I'm going to go and find a good one tomorrow, but you can get in on the action. This is only on my second YouTube channel. It is not on the first one, which is, if you're on YouTube, you're watching on my primary channel right now. You have to go to youtube.com/activelyunwoke, 5 p.m. I'm going to go get some beers. We're going to have a grand old time. But you literally never know what's going to happen. Can you imagine if we made national news 2 weeks in a row? If our stories got into the news again? That'd be pretty great. That'd be pretty rad. But I'm going to be picking out a training. I will be letting you guys know what it is tomorrow. So make sure you follow me on Twitter. Locals is always the best place to follow me. Even if you don't join as a supporter, go to kb.locals.com. You can join for free. And that way you'll always get updates. It will never be censored. Of course, you can also subscribe. Make sure you mount that like button on your way out the door. I'm going to go relax and have a good rest of my night. But I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a great rest of your night. We'll see you soon.